Good morning, everyone. I'm happy that all the speakers survived last party, if you went to the party, and then we have some new guests here. We are starting our quite special session. Yesterday we talked with Sandra that it's the only session on humanities, and the session looks very promising. It will be about films, literature, and journalism. Somehow suited perfectly. And I'm happy to present the first presenter for today. And before that, I want to make two announcements. First, for those who need reimbursement for your train tickets, please come to me during the first coffee break. And secondly, today, after the last session, if you plan to go to the Pride March tomorrow, there is a debrief for the participants at the Pride House in the small opera. So if you want to go there to listen to the last arrangements, to the security issues, please come to me and then we will go together. Okay? And today we have three speakers and two discussants. And we will work like we planned yesterday, unless you have other suggestions, so we will discuss each presentation exactly after the presentation. Is that okay with you? Roman, Anna? Okay. So now, I'm happy to present Sandra Russell from Massachusetts, USA. Sandra is a PhD student in comparative literature at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Sandra holds a bachelor's degree in English and philosophy and master's degree in English language and literature. Interestingly, that Sandra was a Peace Corps volunteer some time ago in Ukraine, in Lutsk. So Sandra speaks Ukrainian, that's why she didn't have any headphones, where she was teaching at the university. And her research interests include post-Soviet and Ukrainian diasporic literature and film, especially women's literary and artistic responses to the Maidan, the reconstruction of identity, nation building, and development of queer and feminist thought. Your profile sounds very interesting, and if you are into this research, please come and talk to Sandra. So please, you have 15 minutes.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's such an honor to be here at this conference and be the American. And I want to preface my talk by saying that I write for an American audience, please forgive me if I am over-explaining some things that are very familiar to all of you. So, my talk is titled Invisible Lives, Literature and the Renegotiation of Queer Space in Post-Soviet Ukraine and Russia. In the effort to develop a transnational approach to queer studies, the binary between post-Soviet Eastern Europe and the so-called West has troubled and even opposed this emerging discourse. Theorizing queerness within a post-Soviet framework requires what sociologist Francesca Stella refers to as alternative epistemologies that foreground the question of visibility. How can queerness be understood in places that have historically and ideologically emphasized sexual invisibility? Considering this question alongside Michel Foucault's discussion of the discursive practice of sexuality as a product of modernity and capitalism, biopower, a more evocative issue emerges. How can sexuality be understood in spaces that have historically eschewed capitalist ideology? Moreover, how are sexual practices, including the structures of family and community, complicated in the wake of repressive political ideologies and systems? Building on the concepts of kinship and belonging, I want to explore literature's possibilities for facilitating new dialogues for queerness within a post-Soviet context. In so doing, I want to pose the idea that literature provides this alternative, or can provide this alternative epistemology for understanding queerness within post-Soviet spaces. Drawing from contemporary post-Soviet literatures of Ukraine and Russia, particularly I'm looking at the work of Oksana Zabushko, which I'm sure many of you know, and Lyudmila Ilitskaya. This paper will consider how queer space has been negotiated and renegotiated within this political and ideological landscape. By taking a historical approach to post-Soviet receptions of queerness, I hope to bring clarity to how queerness has been understood, received, pathologized within this space. So, of course. And I want to note that I'm using lots of discussion yesterday about the definition of defining queerness. I'm using more of an American perspective, which would mean anything that opposes the normative or heteronormative structures. For Russia and Ukraine, the post-Soviet condition has historically created an unwelcome socio-political climate for queerness. This is due in part to the ideological provisions established during the Soviet Union that aim to reinforce and stabilize a prescribed Soviet family, working for the development of the state. As such, reproduction played a significant role in the solidification and promotion of Soviet ideology. Secondarily, the pathologizing of homosexuality is a byproduct of many Eastern European religious establishments. Despite the Soviet dismantling of religion, orthodoxy remains an integral part of the cultural and sexual practices, reinforcing conservative and normative sexual and reproductive behaviors. For those identities and behaviors are perceived as anti-normative or perverse, a life of sexual invisibility is not only expected, but also necessary for survival, both physically and psychologically. Unlike its Western European counterpart, which has more of a history of queer social outlets, homosexuality in Soviet Eastern Europe lacked its own cohesive and socio-political community. During the early 20th century, when other European nations were modernizing, Russia imagined itself on the periphery, effectively denouncing what historian Dan Healy refers to as a European, quote, geography of perversion, in favor of developing a national sexual mythology that celebrated their own natural purity and located Russia between the dangers of a neurostatic Europe and a depraved backward East, unquote. Despite the efforts of many post-Soviet nations to further the process of nation building, queer persons have been and continue to be marginalized and denied civil rights, thus confining their personal and sexual lives to secret, invisible spaces. This is Lyudmila Ilitskaya, and she's one of the first Russian authors to write queer characters sympathetically, and her writing often focuses on problematizing familial relationships and upsetting the moral certitude that accompanies a conventional family structure. I'd like to call this disruption and reimagining of family. It speaks to what anthropologist Ian Lakin calls rodologia, which roughly translates into English as kinship. Rodologia operates as a kind of amateur genealogy that uses the concept of kinship to understand political and social traumas specific to a Soviet past, gulags, war, collectivization, etc. This approach attempts to give meaning to a history of Soviet violence and to, quote, organize one's relation to a Soviet past and make sense of fundamental changes occurring in meanings of political order in post-Soviet Russia, unquote. It is, in other words, it connects the emergence of the individual alongside the development of a post-Soviet state. Ilitskaya's troubling of the traditional family confronts hidden queerness within acceptable familial boundaries, using kinship to expose a traumatic history of pathologized queerness and homophobia within its own traumatic Soviet history. Ilitskaya's 1992 short story, Angel, which is in Sonechka, is often viewed as an important depiction of hidden queerness within a Soviet family. Importantly, although this text is a departure from shameful depictions of homosexuality, Litskaya's complication of a family does not necessarily seek to liberate queer post-Soviet life. The narrative follows a professor, Nikolai Romanovich, who marries a woman in order to become closer to her son, Slava. Nikolai imagines that he is raising and schooling the boy lovingly and chastely, and later, when he is an adult, he seduces him. After Nikolai's death, Slava comes to terms with his own sexuality, as the narrator describes. At the age of 19, he was well aware that he belonged to a rare and special breed of men condemned to furtiveness and secrecy because their soft protuberances enveloped in fabric disgusted him. Ulitskaya's depiction of Slava's sexual awakening is absent of shame, yet he retains the knowledge that, as a homosexual, he must remain hidden. His self-knowledge is later consummated when he meets a new male lover, and the narrator says, "They made strong masculine love, of which Slava had only an inkling before. It was what Slava had been waiting for, and what Nikolai Romanovich had been unable to give him. It was a night of nuptials, of initiation, and of ecstasy beyond the reach of music. A new life began for Slava." The imagery of two men engaged in a passionate, fulfilling, and consensual sexual relationship without shame is still foreign to many Russian readers. However, Ulitskaya dramatizes this openly for her early post-Soviet audience, and in this way, she reconstructs the concept of family to produce a new understanding of queerness within a space of oppression and invisibility. Despite its departure from pathologizing homosexuality, Angel ends with Slava's death, presumably by an ex-lover or anti-gay violence, as the narrator muses. Who other than a maniac could have wanted to kill Ulita or Slava? A man who wanted nothing other than a desperate longing to be loved by a man. Elizabeth A. Scump and Benjamin M. Sutcliffe's assessment of this ending emphasizes the victimhood of homosexual men, as they conclude, quote, "Litskaya's character is a victim of intolerant Soviet society, but also more disturbingly of his own homosexuality. No positive straight characters meet with such a grisly end." And their conclusion, however, I would argue, dismisses Litskaya's literary critique of a society in which LGBTQ people must remain invisible. Slava's gruesome death is the obvious tragedy, that the societal conditions that allowed for it to occur are the real source of shame. In this way, Litskaya challenges the conscience of her post-Soviet audience, and through this form of rodologia, or kinship, she urges them to reimagine their own assumptions by evoking the question, how does the severity of the past shape the failures of the present? And moreover, how can the public's awareness of such failures cultivate greater dignity, unity, and visibility? This question of belonging continually resurfaces for queer communities. While Russia, at least in the West and the United States, has received a lot of attention for its treatment of LGBTQ people, less frequently are these issues discussed within other post-Soviet countries like Ukraine. As Tamara Martsinyuk comments in her 2012 study, Ukrainian legislation toward LGBTQ civil rights has reflected the majority's inability to accept lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people as citizens of Ukraine with human and civil rights, even though Ukraine, in transition to democracy and open society and equality, officially declares that all people have human rights. As Ukraine has transitioned, much has been written about these spaces associated with belonging from the perspective of not only national identity, but also sexual identity. So as many of you maybe know, Oksana Zabushko has had an unprecedented role in shifting Ukraine's literary and feminist landscape in the late 1990s by writing about women's sexuality. In her 1998 short story, Girls, Zabushko describes an intimate sexual relationship between two girls, Darka and Effie. The narrative shifts between the spaces and experiences of adolescence and adulthood. And through this movement, she demonstrates how the relationship remains within a private, hidden space, both in its physicality as well within their own memories. Almost immediately, Zabushko works against normative assumptions about gender relationships. Her use of lush, sensual language elicits this text's sexual urgency from its very first line. And this is the English translation, but it's much more beautiful in Ukrainian. Darka saw her in the trolley, the sweaty, June-soaked trolley, brimming with people and their smells, sweet, almost corpse-like, female, heavy, equestrian, yet oddly palatable, and even stimulating, sexual, distinctly male. By sexualizing a space as ordinary as public transportation, Zabushko uses the text to interrupt her Ukrainian audience's sense of where sex and sexuality belongs. Brought into a broader cultural discourse, this troubling of sexual space poses the idea that built human space is also sexual space, indistinguishable from the private spaces of sexuality that are often privileged, heteronormative sites of knowledge. Through the temporal shifting in Girls, Zabushko provides the reader with two different spaces, Soviet, post-Soviet, positioning the adult Darka as the object of a Soviet history. She begins with an erotic, forbidden space in which Darka and Effie develop an intense sexual and emotional relationship as young girls, only for Effie to be later removed from school for promiscuity, and specifically a relationship with an older male teacher. Their estrangement as adults reflects this trauma. Despite Darka's career success, she's endured 2 divorces and unhappy relationships with men, and Effie is heavily medicated and diagnosed with nymphomania. Darka narrates, okay, let's sum up, and what have we got? Some reputation in her field, some financial independence, provided such a thing as at all possible under our circumstances, and 2 published books, one of them based on her thesis, and 1 textbook from the university, and 2 divorces, an honorary membership in 3 Western academies, which is worth exactly shit, but it will do for an obituary. Through their diverging lives, Zabushko exposes the perceived social ease that accompanies a sexually normative lifestyle. However, underneath there is unexposed misery. While Darka sees Effie as a troubled adult, she wonders, literally, nymphomania. Dr. Lasota confirms the diagnosis. And why nymphomania? Darka wants to object. Why not the hysteria of an abandoned woman? Isn't it nice for doctors? They have a diagnosis for everything. And here, have some pills. Zabushko effectively exposes a troubling facet of queer and sexual pathologization. Whereas Darka sees her as a product of social stigmatization and alienation, medically she is labeled as perverse. There is a simultaneous sense of loss as well as for Darka an awareness of her own survival as she asks herself, why the hell of the 2 of us did I have to be the survivor? Her question exposes the sense that her life, her marriage, her performance as a heterosexual woman is a facade, while Effie is treated as ill, Darka suffers the fate of invisibility. Zabushko's narrative in Girls speaks to Lori Essig's discussion of Soviet and post-Soviet compulsory heterosexuality. In her study Queer in Russia, she explains how, quote, the Soviet system demanded that one be labeled as married in order to obtain scarce resources like housing and jobs. At its roots, the issue of queer post-Soviet space connects back to a historical relationship with physical built space and one that relates to biopower. In this way, queerness is the ungrateful occupant of domestic space and is thus rejected. If one cannot reproduce biologically, as non-normative sexuality implies, contributing to the propagation of a national idea, one does not deserve to occupy that space. This is what Zabushko refers to in her claimed fieldwork in Ukrainian sex as women's sexual victimhood. Likewise, in her narrative in Girls, Zabushko directs the reader's attention to this as Darka reflects miserably at the end. And this grief, live and burning for all those things we did not become and never will become, and hear this disgust with herself, this nausea, this toxicity of the self, and all of life's undigested garbage spilling over the top. How does it fit us in, the decomposing corpse of her last marriage, all the pent-up hatred for herself and the world? Zabushko's narrative is not only one of queer invisibility, but also of trauma, speaking to a common yet ignored social duty of a prescribed sexual life. Darka's failed marriage is akin to a corpse, embodying her own grief, while Effie remains institutionalized. Her narrative speaks not only to the hiddenness of queer, non-normative sexuality, but it also exposes the challenges of a life in a system that voids one of her true self. In an interview about her controversial depictions of sexuality, Zabushko commented, quote, "Sexual life belongs almost entirely to that invisible part of our existence. I'd say it constitutes a third life, along with the daily conscious one, and the one we conduct in our dreams. By engaging the question of belonging, and particularly within a space weighted by a history of oppression and violence, there is an enduring complexity built into this negotiation of post-Soviet queerness. As a response, literature offers this critical narrative space, and one that is rooted in the long and sometimes painful process of building queer epistemologies. It draws from individual and collective memories to articulate and bring visibility and empathy to a pathologized history, and in so doing, it reconfigures individual and collective histories. The contributions of Zabushko and Mulitskaya are only two voices among many, in a growing effort to bring visibility to queer constructions of post-Soviet space, including family structure, political visibility, and the acquisition of civil rights. Literature as a dialogical medium offers new paradigms for essential knowledge within emerging negotiations of queerness in post-Soviet culture. They have worked intrepidly within this stigmatized space to excavate and liberate voices that have been and remain silenced. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Questions, comments in the first place from Anna and Ramon?
Thank you very much for a very nice presentation. I have two short questions. So the first one is about the victimhood. So usually in the literature, in films, queer characters either need to die or be really unhappy, showing the trauma and the victimhood and invisibility of queer people. I was wondering if there are any parts in the texts that you have just discussed that could be subverting the narrative of victimhood, invisibility, and trauma. This is the first question. And the second is about the references that you have used, how the Western gaze can be balanced with the local knowledge production. Maybe you have used some references that could have been balancing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions. They're very good and very interesting, and ones that I grapple with myself. And in looking at these, so to your first question, I think I'd have to say no. I think both texts, they don't subvert that narrative that you see so often. So in that way, I'm slightly disappointed, and I think that in my research, I'd like to look at more texts that kind of complement that dialogue, because in queer narratives, I feel like that's almost always the problem, and it can't seem to get away from that sense of victimhood. And I don't have a good answer to why that is. Maybe someone else does, but it's a great question. And secondly, your question about the Western gaze. I'm not entirely sure about that either. It's a terrific question, and one that I'm trying to negotiate myself, reading these texts from this space that I'm self-consciously not part of, and also wondering how I fall into those traps as well sometimes. So that's why it's wonderful for me to be here with Ukrainian and Eastern European scholars to kind of help me balance that. So thank you for your questions. I'm sorry I don't have better answers.
Just a quick comment on that. After Roman makes his comments, it would be interesting in regard to this particular question to hear the reflection of people in the audience who have read Zabushko's story or Ulitskaya. I have read Zabushko's Girls. Honestly, it was a long time ago, I don't remember, but if you have your own reflection, that would be interesting to hear the local story. But please come. And please, in the meantime, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for your presentation. And I just, being honest, I'm really so far from art criticism. So I just will make another approach, and I would like to comment and to ask you something about the theoretical, historical, and social context of your article, which I have read. Surely, so being honest, could you please specify, because when I have learned the article, it was similar for me that you use something like, you know, the model, the philosophical model of the linear progress and civilization approach to the issue of queer history in different parts of the world. For example, in your entrance, you just say that it is difficult, for example, the queer lives were also invisible in Eastern Europe because all historical conditions was hard for queer people. Maybe could you specify about this your approach? Because, for example, being honest, for me it's wrong. For me it smells like Western colonial eye, because you know, for example, I also worked with works of Francesco Stella and other researchers in the field of post-socialist gender studies, and they also stated about the queer history and its developments like the line of waves, but not and just a great line. And yeah, for example, we know about the sexual revolution in 20th years in USSR, which Western countries, for example, maybe did not experience. And Tamara Martinyuk also mentioned yesterday about the concept of traditionalization, for example, detailed described by Igor Kohn, that, for example, some researchers state that in 90s years also Eastern European countries made more steps for queer emancipation, and later they made several steps again backwards. Yeah, and another question is about cultural trauma for queer people. Yeah, for me it was very interesting to discuss with you, because I also I tried to learn a lot about subculture of gender and sexual violence in places of imprisonment and detention, and you said about Gulag trauma for queer people, and it is really a very widespread point of view. But I also, for example, after learning a lot of literature, a lot of documentary just sources, for example, I came to another point of view, because you know a lot of sources state that specific culture of sexual and gender violence in places of imprisonment was established and was developed in Soviet Union in the era which is called Zrely Socialism, and maybe it could be literally translated in English like mature socialism, in 60s and 70s. For example, Ukrainian researcher Anton Simkovich, Georgian human rights activist Chaidze, and other researchers in this field also state about it. So I think it could be also a question to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roman, and I'm really happy to receive your feedback and your comments, because I know that you work on this idea of decolonizing post-Soviet space. Correct? Yes. And that's something that I absolutely feel like I need to use more of, because I feel like I have a blind spot as an American. So, and one of the things that I always think about, and I find myself doing, is you know, the idea that trying to frame queerness in post-Soviet or Soviet post-Soviet queerness is is othering or this kind of orientalizing or fetishizing of that space, and I think that's deeply problematic, and I agree that it needs to be decolonized. So I think that would be the next iteration of this work, is to think more critically about what that looks like, right? Because I think as an American, looking in this direction at this geographic space and queerness in it, it's easy to get caught up in reinforcing Western ideology through that, right, in a problematic way. So I think that your comments are very helpful. Thank you. Appreciate them.
Дуже дякую за виступ. У мене два такі запитання. Перше стосується ось ширшого літературного контексту в Україні та Росії, можливо, порівняння, оскільки ситуація трішки різна. Я думала, ви вивчили. Sorry, I could speak English.
Okay, I'm sorry for
Yes,
saying Oh. So sorry. Okay. Now I can, yes. All right.
Як би ви прокоментували загалом ситуацію з квір-літературою в сучасній Україні і Росії? Чи вона подібна, чи є якісь тенденції, наприклад, збільшення кількості подібних текстів? І що вас спонукало відібрати ось ці кейси? Мені завжди цікаво, чому саме Забушко, доволі, в принципі, відома авторка, чи є якісь більш-менш відомі автори, авторки, які пишуть? Це перше питання, тобто ширший літературний контекст в порівнянні. І друге, що для вас queer spaces, чи вони відрізняються від LGBT spaces? Чи це те ж саме, чи все ж таки ширше? Тобто як ви концептуалізуєте queer spaces?
Thank you for your questions, Tamara. The simple answer is I chose these two texts because I like them. They are both very early post-Soviet, so they don't necessarily address the very contemporary condition. And part of that decision was because I was, at the time I was doing the research, I was trying to map that trajectory. So I'd like to bring in more contemporary portrayals or narratives about queerness. To me, not too much has changed, but and I could be wrong, but it seems that it's still, like Anna said, this narrative of kind of the hiddenness or the queer victimhood. But yes, certainly I want to bring this into even a more contemporary dialogue, because I recognize that these texts are, well, for Zabушko. And the reason I use Zabушko too is, again, writing for an American audience, she's not known in the United States. So I think she represents a kind of important Ukrainian writing figure. So outside of this space, she's not as well known. And to your second question, I would say queerness, as I mentioned, refers to the behavior or the lives lived in opposition to the normative expectations that are part of the societal structure, whereas I would say LGBTQ refers more to the people themselves or the lives themselves. And I know that's kind of a very slight distinction, but that is the way that I'm writing about them. And I can't remember your final question. Is that? There was just okay. Thank you, Jackie.
We have time for one more question. Okay. Then we will move to our next speaker, and this is Karlis Verdins. Karlis is a researcher at the Institute of Literature, Folklore and Art at the University of Latvia. And currently, Carlos is studying comparative literature at the Washington University in St. Louis, USA. And he has also published a number of articles, monographs, and translations of poetry. Please, do you want to come here? But you
And now, will you hear me?
it is.
Okay. Hello, nice to meet you, everybody. I think such conference is a great opportunity to meet other queer researchers and to establish contacts and to do some networking. I hope we will do that today. And my theme is What Preciniece Svaha Can Teach Us, a pro-gay newspaper of interwar Latvia. One of the main tasks that the representatives of Baltic queer studies have undertaken is to recreate the hidden queer history of the region, speaking of particular life stories of the homosexuals, bisexuals and trans persons, as well as the conditions under which they lived. The archaeology of the queer past of the national state challenges the nationalistic constructions of the history, which usually depict the nation as homogeneous, monolingual and heterosexual. Such research work offers another perspective on history of the region, which emphasizes the ethnic, ideological and sexual multiplicity of the territory. The problems of sexuality discussed in the public discourse of the Republic of Latvia of the interwar period from 1918 till 1940 pretty much resemble questions discussed today. Among them are gender difference, the legal status of homosexuals and their presence in public space, women's rights, the legal status of trans persons, abortion, etc. If democracy allows the open discussion of all these subjects, then authoritarian regimes erase their presence from public discourse. In Latvia, the period from 1934 to 1940 was marked by the authoritarian leader Kārlis Ulmanis, who, despite being rumored to be a closeted homosexual, made discussions of gender and sexuality impossible with the help of censorship. From 1924 to 1934, before Ulmanis' coup d'etat, homosexuality was a subject frequently touched upon by Latvian tabloids. Half-true and invented stories of a secret organization of homosexuals, the Black Carnation, or mysterious lesbian clubs could help to sell an evening newspaper. However, they always placed this theme in the position of cheap scandal and sensation. In the German-speaking countries, the question of homosexuality was made visible already in the 19th century by sexologist Richard von Krafft-Ebing, Magnus Hirschfeld and others. There were, moreover, homophile organizations with their own periodicals, Der Eigen, Die Freundschaft and Die Freundin. In Czechoslovakia, local activists published the magazines Hlas Sexuálnych menšín, Nový hlas and Kamarad. More harsh treatment of homosexuality in the Russian Empire left its mark on the new national states of the interwar period. There were neither homophile movements nor periodicals in these countries, so the queer subject was never present in public discussions. However, there is one exception that shows the potential of the gay press, or at least the gay-friendly press, in interwar Latvia. The small, short-lived newspaper Preciniece, Svaha, Matchmaker was a bilingual weekly of dating ads, as well as small stories and articles related to questions of love, flirtation and marriage. Among various low-quality pieces, a story by Mikhail Zoshenko or Rabindranath Tagore, or a selection of aphorisms by Friedrich Nietzsche could suddenly appear. As the Department of Periodicals and Associations of Ministry of the Interior announced, Preciniece is one of the new periodicals which was permitted to be published by the department in May of 1928. Its editor-in-chief was Sava Medvedin. Its publishing company was called Ankers. Its office was situated in the same building as its print shop, owned by Moshe Machtenberg, in the very center of Riga, Maris Street 8. In June, the same publisher started another weekly humor newspaper, Budilnik, the Alarm Clock, published only in Russian. In Preciniece, Latvian and Russian publications were published side by side. However, they were not mutually translated. Only 12 issues were published during the summer of 1928, from May 26 to August 25, before the newspaper landed on the list of the trash and obscenity literature. It was a list of publications periodically issued by the Ministry of the Interior, who prohibited certain books and periodicals from being openly sold in newsstands and bookshops. The next edition of the list includes also Budilnik, as well as a small selection of erotic short stories about modern ladies and their male admirers by French author Maurice de Cobra, Malna The Black Carnation, probably because of the public scandal created by the arrest of so-called Black Carnation, an informal group of male homosexuals in Riga. The content of the newspaper became increasingly pro-gay as it proceeded. Besides its main agenda, advocacy of heterosexual marriage, it published also little stories of unfaithful wives, rape, love suicides and unhappy marriages. The last issues of Preciniece contain several contributions by an author with a pen name Silhouette, who in his little stories celebrated same-sex love between both women and men and wrote critically about heterosexual marriage. The choice of his pen name seems obvious. It was a famous nightclub in Berlin, Charlottenburg, that opened in 1926 and was frequented by gays and cross-dressers. His story, A Brunette and a Blonde, introduced the readers to a same-sex couple of two women. Characteristically for the time, their features were contrasted with each other to construct one as the dominating masculine type, while another was feminine. Quote, one of them was sharp and swift, while the other was soft, passively obedient. Unquote. One day the narrator sees them kissing in a forest and goes away puzzled as to what such behavior could mean. He consults a doctor and finally gets an explanation. Quote, you saw something that we doctors call same-sex love between women. Unquote. Another story was dedicated to a same-sex couple consisting of two men. Alexander and Piotr are childhood friends who study together, enter puberty together, then have an unsatisfying sexual experience with a female prostitute, and finally decide to spend their life together. Despite the trouble their lifestyle causes, they are forced to leave the university when rumors of their homosexuality spread. They finally stay together, faithful to each other. Quote, two men lived together for more than 30 years, like an exemplary husband and wife. Unquote. These naive stories seem to be written with the intention to serve their readers as an ABC of homosexuality. Silhouette is eager to support same-sex couples and their rights to love, yet such subjects cannot be discussed at length. They also can be interpreted in another way as small, entertaining stories for low-brow audience. Silhouette also published a small story called Bigamist about his good, attractive friend who marries an unpleasant woman. Finally, she turns out to be a bigamist, so the man divorces her. Such a story seems at odds with the main idea of the newspaper to find a match for all its readers. However, to attract audience, Bretoniece publishes different stories, including those one of unhappy marriages. Besides these stories, Bretoniece commented on the so-called Black Carnation trial of 3 male homosexuals that was taking place in Riga. Not becoming too bold, the anonymous author quotes Swiss doctor August Forel's statement that homosexuality is not an acquired depravity, but rather a consequence of an anomalous development of the tonsils. It would therefore be more rational to cure such subjects rather than to persecute them under the law. He also shortly adds that several countries have already dropped penalties for man-to-man sex. As we can see, these journalists were not very well prepared to discuss such things. Actually, they didn't get away from these discourses of crime and medicine that dominated the understanding of homosexuality in the first half of the 20th century. Close reading of the texts of the newspaper reveals its quiet tactics of homoerotic subversion. Placing heterosexual and homosexual content side by side, it offered its readers a bisexual and bilingual perspective on the pleasure. Disarranging the traditional patriarchal values of family that educated its members to respect authority, Bretoniece challenged the notions of morals, nationalism, acceptable behavior, and good taste of the conservative guardians of Latvian public morals. These little disruptions of time and space, when queer subjects suddenly appear, belong to what José Esteban Muñoz calls a glimpse of utopia, or the queer futurity, that forms short breaks in a stagnant heterosexual present. Bretoniece is proof both of the very possibility of such a utopia in the Latvian interwar publishing industry and of the fragile and short-lived existence of such publication. As poet Kārlis Elias recalled in his memoirs, Bretoniece was one of the newspapers favored by young contemporary artists who entertained themselves with it during a boring train journey. One of his friends even shows a copy of Bretoniece at the song festival in Jelgava town and pretends to be its representative. This small lowbrow publication was perceived only as an example of gutter press. It seems unlikely that anybody would see it as something more. And thumbing through Bretoniece's pages, one can find exclusively heterosexual dating ads. If we ask if its gay-friendly editorial staff rejected same-sex ads and did nothing to help queer people to find partners, the answer probably should be sought in a different section of the same last page. Medical section was a small space for bilingual announcements which communicated with readers in a quite mysterious way. It answered their scenting questions, which concerned more risky themes than these discussed in the featured stories and articles. For example, it gave advice on contraception or disdained masturbation as harmful. However, most answers just promised a personal answer to the question, sent by a post, or invited the letter writer to pay a visit to the editorial office of the newspaper to have a private conversation with the doctor, or to pick up the personal letter at a certain time. Such procedure permitted the establishment of discreet relationships among the editorial staff, their supposed medical experts, and the readers. relationships which the newspaper did not reflect. It is therefore impossible to know what the correspondence in the medical section was really hiding. As it can be seen, the gay-friendly stories appeared mostly in Russian. It is hard to say if they just reflected the desires of Kretinets' Russian contributors, or Latvian language was perceived as the official state language and therefore were less suitable for expressing sexually dissident ideas. It is not possible to say that Latvian publications were regarded more rigorously than publications in minority languages. The editions of the list of the trash and obscenity literature included quite a few Russian titles as well. Still, this bilingual and bisexual publication can serve as a proof of the different attempts to the gay circles of East Europe to overcome the silence forced upon them by the criminalization of male same-sex relationship. It also shows the potential of a lowbrow publication to serve for some subversive goals, both on its pages and in creating an invisible net, including editorial staff, readers, and medical experts, a net which could operate also beyond the laws in the public space. Thank you.
So Anna and Roman, or Anna or Roman. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It was very interesting to read your essay as well as hear your presentation. One of the tasks of queer theory, or, well, better to say, one of the things that queer theory does is the problematization of the way how historians use modern terminologies, such as the concepts heterosexual, transgender, gay, lesbian, etc. And to problematize the projection of these terms into the past. In her book, Disturbing Practices, Laura Doan is talking about this problematization. She describes the relationships of two women who have been accused for being lesbian. However, she proves in her book how false it will be to project the identity of a lesbian to these women, and they were not self-identifying as such, and also this was a modern term that would be so problematic to apply to this area with this specific time, which was the First World War period. So she talks about the exchange between queer studies and history, insisting to step outside the logic of identity to address questions as yet unasked about modern sexual past. So I was wondering, how do you cope with that problematic? How do you avoid projecting distinct sexual identities to people who might not self-identify as such? Because in my deep understanding, queer theory is the space where we have to problematize such projections. I was wondering what you think about that.
Hello. Of course, I do not know if these people identify themselves as gays or bisexuals or something else, but in the public discourse of inter-rural Latvia, such words as homosexual or lesbian, they were present, at least as a sign of some scandalous behavior or some unwelcomed foreign influence, but people did know what these words mean if they were readers of these tabloids, at least. And there were some medical publications and criminologist publications which touched these subjects as well. So if I understand your question correctly, the question is if we can talk about just same-sex relationship, or is it possible to call such desire as a homosexual lesbian desire? So I think in the context of Interval Latvia we can use all of these designations.
Thank you very much, Karolis, for your presentation. I'm very glad that life gave me a chance to learn more about queer history in Latvia, LGBT plus history in Latvia, because this year in the Dotic Festival in Minsk I also heard the lecture of Inet Lipska, maybe you know her, yeah, but she just talked about queer history of Soviet Latvia, but not interwar Latvia, and it was very, and due to the fact that mostly she said about history of non-heterosexual, non-cisgender men, and I was, this way I was really glad to learn more about history of queer women in Latvia from your article and your presentation, and it was, for example, interesting for me to understand that notwithstanding we can see a lot of archaic gender sexism stereotypes about lesbian women which are presented in this article, for example, about their hatred towards males or their disappointment in relationship with men. All these archaic stereotypes are presented in these articles, but it was also interesting that just we can see more application, only moral judgment towards homosexual women, instead application of punitive psychiatry like it was in Soviet era. And it was really exploration for me, thanks. And maybe the only small question I would like to ask you just about linguistic issues, linguistic misunderstanding for me. In this short article about the about the black house, yeah, public house in Buenos Aires, I had noticed that something like the sixth room was for same-sex love and the seventh one for homosexual actions. What does this difference mean? Maybe, or is this about, I don't know, LTR and sexual relationships or something like this? Could you please explain me if you know? Thanks.
Yeah, ночные развлечения в черном доме. Very interesting article because it presents sexuality as a continuum. There is this black house somewhere in Buenos Aires, and you go in there and you can receive whatever kind of pleasure you want. I think this is also a way how to queer this sexual pleasure, how to make this reader to understand that you can go to any of these 16 rooms and you will find something you really enjoy. I don't know what were they thinking when they put next to each other same-sex love and homosexuality, and probably something very similar. I think this article is full of euphemisms anyway, and they were using these notions very arbitrary, and I don't know what they were really thinking of. I just wanted to present this article for you to show how they try to present this sexual desire. Afinsky Noci, this is also something very suspicious, and I'm not quite sure what did happen there. I asked my Greek friend in the States, do you have such notion as Afinsky Nochi in Greek culture, and he said, no, I have no idea what you are talking about.
There was question? Yes.
Я Воронина Марина, Харьков, Харьковский национальный педагогический университет имени Сковороды. У меня больше такой профессиональный вопрос по поводу, какой тираж был газеты, насколько она действительно, я что вот имею в виду, занимаюсь феминизмом, и как раз 20-е и 30-е годы женодело очень распространено, вроде как много литературы, но я, например, столкнулась с тем, что в Харькове, который на тот момент был столицей Украины, журнал «Делегатка» в 2009 году разрезала я. Его никто до этого явно не брал в библиотеке Короленко, одна из крупнейших библиотек Украины. То есть действительно, или это было вот сами для себя выдали, ну как-то может кто-то купил. Вот такой вопрос.
Жаль, но я не знаю, какой был тираж, но эта газета должна была как-то... Okay, I'm sorry. This newspaper had to be commercially successful. It was not subsidized by anybody. It was made on commercial grounds, so I guess the circulation had to be huge enough to make it commercially successful. So, yeah, I have no idea. Unfortunately, it's not mentioned anywhere how big was this circulation, but actually it should have been something that you can just go to a press kiosk and to buy. And this inclusion in this list of trash and obscenity literature, it means that this book or this newspaper could not be openly placed in a bookshop or in a kiosk. It was hidden somewhere underneath, and you should really know what you're looking for and to ask if you have svacha, and then they would sell it to you. But normally all editions which were placed into this list, they went bankrupt because it was very, very hard to survive if you were not allowed to show your publication openly.
Thank you. More comments or questions to Carlos' presentation? No? Thank you then. And then the third speaker for today for this panel is Clinton Glenn from Montreal, Canada, with a very international, faraway panel. Clinton is a PhD student in communication studies at the Department of Art History and Communication at McGill University in Montreal. Glenn's primary research interests are gender, sexuality, transnationalism, and cultural production, with his PhD dissertation project examines 3 case studies in Eastern Europe to explore the intersections of LGBT pride, activism, Europeanization, and diplomatic soft power. So I suppose your presentation is based on your PhD dissertation.
It's connected, yes.
Okay, please.
Okay. And you need video. Oh, video. I don't know. Once again, it's view.
everyone. I'm going to try and navigate both computers here. This might not be the easiest thing. Good morning, my name is Clinton Glenn, and I am a PhD student in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. I want to thank the organizers of this amazing conference for accepting my paper, and I'm really excited to be here today. I'm also very nervous, and when I'm nervous, I talk really fast, so if I'm talking fast, please wait. Okay. I want to preface my presentation with a few different things. So I'm at the beginning stages of my research, so what I will be discussing here is ongoing, incomplete, and subject to change. Based on the first day of this conference, my reading list has become a lot longer, which is a great thing. Secondly, my paper title, Go West, Gay Propaganda, Documentary Film, and the Spectre of Homophobia in Eastern Europe, is intended as a provocation, not necessarily to the scholars and students who live and study in Eastern Europe, but to Western researchers in fields of gender, media, and visual culture studies. The constituent parts of this title come from different narratives found in the documentary films that I will be discussing here, and I hope it becomes more apparent as I go through my presentation how this title works, and we can come back to this during questions if you like. Finally, I want to highlight my position with regards to my research. I am a queer Canadian scholar researching an area that I do not live in and do not have lived experience of. This has a direct impact on the type of scholarship that is available to me and has guided my research questions to this point. I have chosen in this presentation to refrain from a lot of heavy theory because to this point I have no knowledge of how well some of the scholars that I continually reference circulate in Eastern Europe. And a lot of these are queer urban studies scholars, including John Binney, David Bell, and Gil Valentine, Bobby Benedicto, Martin Manalansan, and Amin Ghaziani, to name a few. And perhaps we can come back to this in the question period. As a way to start my presentation, I want to open with a quote from the 2011 documentary East Bloc Love. Speaking about the desire to hold a pride march down one of the main streets in Minsk as a part of Slavic Pride 2010, Belarusian LGBT activist Sergei Yanin states, "If you are not visible, you are nothing." Here, visibility is positioned as a key condition of LGBT politics and activism. Without it, repression and violence go unchecked. However, as the film illustrates, visibility comes with significant risk. In their attempts to hold a pride march in Minsk, the activists are attacked and their pride flags ripped from their hands. They are detained by police, but are released after being interrogated. While there have been no attempts to hold pride marches in Belarus over the past few years, activism still continues through community organizing and cultural events under the auspices of LGBT rights group Makeout, among many others. Before I get into the bulk of my presentation, I want to briefly outline my dissertation research so you have a better understanding of what it is that I'm actually researching. So my primary focus is on the cultural production and activism of LGBT pride in the Baltic states, and I've become much more recently familiar with LGBT and queer activism in Belarus and here in Ukraine. Of particular importance to my research are cross-cultural activist and artistic networks that are being created and which involve individuals and organizations from the West, as well as LGBT and/or queer communities in the countries of Eastern Europe. My major objects of study include art exhibitions, film festivals and screenings, public performances, and print publications such as zines and photo books. Part of this research includes examining the involvement of funding bodies from the European Union, the European Economic Area, and embassies from countries including Canada and the United States, and much of this funding is directed towards cultural production. Here I am looking at the forms of cultural events that are supported and the type of artistic practices that this supports. So the image that you see up on the screen right now is a photograph from one of the events that I've identified and will be researching further. Held at the Contemporary Art Center Vilnius in 2013, From Dusk Till Dawn, 20 Years of LGBT Freedom in Lithuania, was curated as a part of the cultural programming of Baltic Pride in 2013. The exhibition featured paintings, photographs, performance pieces, talks, film, and video installations reflecting on the 20 years that had passed since Lithuania had rid itself of Soviet-era legal prohibitions on homosexuality. The link between nationalism, the Lithuanian independence movement, and LGBT identity is particularly striking. Here, the liberation of the state from Soviet rule is paralleled by the curator of the exhibition to struggles of the local LGBT community and the incomplete project of obtaining full civil rights. So this presentation takes a small corpus of documentaries from the Baltic states and Belarus, produced in conjunction with LGBT pride festivals, that look at the logistics between pride marches and how they have, for better or worse, engaged populations in national conversations around tolerance, sexuality, marginality, and integration or not. The documentaries that I discussed include Homo at LV, about the first Pride March held in Riga, Latvia in 2005, East Bloc Love, focusing on attempts to hold Pride in Minsk, Belarus in 2010, and We Can Be Gay Today, Baltic Pride 2013, documenting the organization and staging of Baltic Pride 2013 in Vilnius, Lithuania. In comparing these three films, I will first examine their narrative logics, the type of activism they depict, and how they connect to larger activist movements in Eastern Europe. For example, East Bloc Love features interviews with public figures from Poland, Latvia, and Romania and Estonia, though the film's primary focus is on Belarus. In comparing these films, there are a number of common characteristics. The indifference of and hostility of local politicians, security services and religious communities, the repeated supposition by anti-LGBT protesters that homosexuality is a Western import and thus opposed to the nation state, the question of emigration, and the networks that are being built across cities, countries, and borders. Here, I also want to point out some of the more practical aspects of these films, the types of funding that they receive, the festivals that they've been shown at, and their afterlives on internet distribution platforms. Finally, I will briefly discuss the importance of these works to researchers such as myself. They include interviews and document events that I was not able to attend, and have allowed me to begin to put together key research questions that will inform my research going forward. Here I want to briefly mention that there are a number of other documentaries on similar subjects which are of interest to me in my research, but did not include because of time constraints. So examples include This is Gay Propaganda, LGBT Rights and the War in Ukraine by Ukrainian-Canadian filmmaker Marusia Borsiukov, East-West Sex and Politics by German documentarian Jochen Hick, and Campaign of Hate, Russia and Gay Propaganda, directed by gay porn star Michael Lucas. So, Homo at LV, directed by Latvian documentarian Kaspars Goba, was filmed over a period of 5 years and released in 2010. The film's narrative begins with the first Pride March to be held in Riga, Latvia in 2005, and its subsequent aftermath. The parade, organized by ILGA Latvia, polarized society and galvanized opposition to LGBT rights, and in particular, the ability for the local LGBT community to hold events in public. The film also looks at the prominent split that happened within the activists themselves. Two members of ILGA Latvia actively fought against holding any further Pride marches and sided with the anti-LGBT rights organization No Pride, while those who supported the march went on to form Mosaica, which became the main LGBT rights organization in Latvia. So this film ends on a particularly pessimistic note, where one interviewee, who's a priest who had come out, had become exhausted through the ensuing backlash and the years of activism and is seen emigrating to Western Europe. The question of whether LGBT individuals should stay and fight or leave the country is rhetorically left unanswered. Unlike the other films I'm discussing herein, Homo at LV was directed and produced by Latvians and received funding from the Latvian government's main film fund, from LTV, the main state broadcaster, and from the Baltic Cultural Fund. It also received support in the form of a script support from the Berlinale Tallinn Campus 2007, ESO-Doc 2006, and Ex-Orient 2006. Of note, prominent German filmmakers and documentarians Rosa von Braunheim and Jochen Hick served as script supervisors for this film. The funding that the film received from Latvian organizations was particularly controversial, with some members of parliament claiming that it was inappropriate to fund a film on, quote, such an insignificant topic, and that it had cast Latvian society in a terrible light. East Bloc Love was directed by Australian filmmaker Logan Mucha and produced in conjunction with the controversial Russian LGBT rights activist Nikolai Alexeyev and released in 2011. The film is unique among the three that I'm presenting here in that its sole focus is not on a single country, even though Belarus is the bulk of the narrative. The narrative depicts the attempts of local Belarusian activists with the support of Alexeyev's Gay Russia organization to hold a pride march in Minsk, Belarus as part of Slavic Pride 2010. The film also features interviews with activists in Romania, Poland, Estonia, and Latvia, emphasizing the need for solidarity amongst LGBT communities in these countries and the importance of visibility, being on the streets, making one's existence known, and marching for basic human rights. Unlike the other two films, East Bloc Love was not produced with the participation of large funding bodies, but based on a small grant. Rather, the director had initially intended to make a film about Moscow Pride, but Russian bureaucracy got in the way. Instead, he was put in touch with Belarusian activists and hopped on a plane to Minsk to film their attempts to march. The film's narrative is similar to that of Homo at LV. The Pride March is confronted by counter-protesters and broken up by police. The film concludes with one of the main Belarusian activists, Sergei Yenin, participating in a Pride March in Warsaw. He reflects on the importance of engaging in and making oneself present in the public sphere, again noting, if you are not visible, you are nothing. The film's accompanying press kit notes that Yenin had been expelled from university in Belarus because of his activism and currently lives in Warsaw. And so here we see the personal consequences for his activism within the narrative of the film. We Can Be Gay Today, Baltic Pride 2013, depicts the preparation for and staging of the March for Equality in Vilnius, Lithuania, as part of Baltic Pride 2013. This Pride March was only the second in the country's history and faced concerted opposition from local and federal politicians, religious groups, and anti-LGBT rights protesters. Directed by French filmmakers Nathalie Seville and François Message, the film received financial support from l'Institut Français in Vilnius, the Lithuanian Gay League, or LGL, and Baltic Pride. The filmmakers had previously been involved in producing commercials for Baltic Pride, which were banned from Lithuanian TV for their depictions of LGBT families. We Can Be Gay Today is described not as a strict documentation of Baltic Pride, but as a representation of the filmmakers' experiences leading up to the March for Equality in March for Equality in Vilnius. The film also contrasts the previous March for Equality in 2010 with the 2013 edition. In 2010, the march was held under heavy police protection, and participants were bused to the site of the march, a small street alongside the river Neris across from the old city center. Counter-protesters threw bottles and tried to storm the march, though the police cordon held the majority back behind metal barriers. This march, which was described as humiliating by participants, stands in stark contrast to the 2013 march, which after a legal challenge was allowed to be held on Gedimino Avenue in the center of the old city, beginning at Cathedral Square, which was an important site of major nationalist protests during the 1991-1992 fight for independence, and ending at Lukishka Square, an urban park bordered by the municipal courts and the Museum of Genocide Victims, among other state institutions. During the opening credit sequence of We Can Be Gay Today, the following text appears as an intertitle. Quote, in July 2013, the Lithuanian Gay League organized a March for Equality in Vilnius, Lithuania, one of the most homophobic cities in Europe, end quote. This particular quote is important for two reasons. One, the linking of a geographical and metropolitan space to the concept of homophobia, and two, the tenacity of the Lithuanian Gay League who chose to hold a Pride March in spite of the hostility of the local population. Similar claims are made in Homo at LV, in particular the ambivalence of many of the subjects interviewed and the language used on the signs by counter-protesters. Also important in the three films is the spatial politics of Pride marches. While East Bloc Love relies heavily on the link between visibility and identity, it also acknowledges the practical challenges that Pride marches face. Authorities had banned the Pride March in Minsk because it apparently had passed too closely to a metro station. Likewise, the original permission for a Pride March in Riga was given with the stipulation that it not pass in front of the city hall. We Can Be Gay Today documents the difficulty LGL had in obtaining permission to march down Gedimino Avenue, a symbolic street in Vilnius that is often used for nationalist parades and public expressions of Lithuanian national identity. Here, spatial politics is central to the narrative. Which groups or communities are allowed to march in public and how the state reacts. Finally, the films reinforce the types of rhetoric that are aimed at pride in a large part of Eastern Europe, that homosexuality is foreign, an imposition on these nations, and is the result of the influence of the European Union and Western values. Here, homosexuality is positioned as antithetical to national identity and thus against the state. Like most documentaries focusing on LGBT topics, these films primarily circulated through film festivals. For example, We Can Be Gay Today premiered at Krivez, the LGBT film festival held annually in Vilnius. It was also screened at some of the more prominent film festivals, including the San Francisco Film Festival, the Black Carnation LGBT Film Festival in Riga, Homochrome Film Fest in Cologne, and the Major Gay Film Festival in Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Likewise, Homo LV was screened at the Berlinale, the New Fest in New York City, and the Paris Gay and Lesbian Film Fest. East Bloc Love has screened at Framed Line International LGBT Film Festival in San Francisco, LGBT Film Days in Riga, and Imagination LGBT Film Festival in my home in Montreal, and the Melbourne Queer Film Festival, among others. Here I note that these festivals, not simply for the sake of illustrating how the films have traveled, but that film festivals can be seen as points of contact between Western audiences and the communities depicted in these documentaries, and because of the prominent role that LGBT film festivals have had in terms of culture and community building. Here it is important to note the formative role that film festivals, in particular LGBT film festivals, have in this dynamic. German film scholar Scotty Loist has described this process through the selection of films, the exhibition of them in theaters, and the collective experience of audiences. Loist describes the importance of LGBT film screenings, in particular as, quote, counter-public spheres where non-stereotypical, non-negative images could be seen, the images that the mainstream could not provide. Festivals also allow for communities to form and allow for, quote, a performative influence on community, as people came together to see themselves on screen and support their own art and artists, end quote. In looking at these three films, they represent documentation of communities that are all but invisible in the West, and likewise, these sometimes the first things that Western people will actually see. A major question that I have approaching these films, and remains unanswered at this point, is what impact, if any, do they have on LGBT individuals in the West? Given that these films have been shown as a larger part of film festivals, it is perhaps a danger that they may have been seen and forgotten by many viewers. Oops. As a way to conclude, I want to briefly address the idea of value, in particular from the standpoint of a researcher such as myself. Much of the information on Pride marches available for a Western researcher is incomplete, contradictory, or not available in English. These films have confirmed specific facts about these Pride marches, including the routes that were taken, the groups that participated, and the rhetoric of counter-protesters. In particular, the language used on placards held by marchers and counter-protesters is of interest to my larger research project, both through the use of English alongside local languages and the types of political discourses they exemplify. Finally, these films are valuable because they document ephemeral events. Here, they allow me to begin piecing together research questions and avenues of investigation based on protest, activism, and the social and urban sphere in major Eastern European cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Clinton. That was very interesting, and while our discussants are coming to pose the questions and comments, as one of the members of the organizing committee of Kyiv Pride, I would be very interested if you would include Kyiv Pride history in your research. I was just thinking that, to the best of my knowledge, no one is yet analyzing it from the aside, from the scholarly perspective, and also this is the idea for those who have students. The professors in this auditorium who have students as an idea.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yes, actually, I have a large interest in doing that. The only problem I have is that I have so much information and so many things that I want to look at. It's a matter of like, how do I narrow it down? So the research that I'm doing this summer and being here and seeing what's going on with Pride is helping me to sort of shift what I want to do, and I'm not quite sure where it's going yet, but
Sure.
yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a couple of questions, and they are very related to each other, actually. So, first of all, would you position these films as LGBT films or as queer films, and why? The second question is, you talked about the similarities between the movies, and I'm curious about whether there is anything that you didn't really like in those movies, both in terms of their narrative, but also who directed the films and how it had impacted on the movies. And the final question is about tolerance. You told that those movies were advocating for greater tolerance. So I'm curious about your stand toward the political concept of tolerance, and especially from the perspective of queer critique. How would you look at this politically invested agenda of toleration? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. So for the first one, are they LGBT or are they queer films? I would say they're absolutely LGBT films and not queer films because they don't really engage in queer politics or queer critique. A lot of these organizations, they're involved in sort of like assimilating into society and becoming accepted. They're fighting for partnership rights. They're fighting for the ability to have pride. And in some ways, that's not super radical compared to like trying to deconstruct the idea of like the family or relationships. They want to become a part of the nation state rather than rip apart sort of the foundations of it. What did I not like about the films? I'm ambivalent about them. I do think they're very interesting, but they have a very limited perspective, especially the ones that are directed by people from the West. So I always look at them with this air of suspicion as to who was included in the final cut, because there's a lot of footage that was left on the floor. For example, East Block Love, the director told me that he had 50 hours of footage, and the film is like 90 minutes long. So there's a lot that's not included, and that becomes the question of how are these films scripted? Because they're not scripted in that you give a script to someone and they're reading it and acting it. They're scripted in terms of the narratives that they decide to keep, which ones are most interesting, which ones sort of push forward whatever agenda the films have, and those that are either counter to it or just not that interesting or left aside. Also, they're not that aesthetically interesting. They're kind of basic, and both the directors of the French film, the French directors, François Massage and Nathalie Seville, and Logan Mucha have both said that they're a little bit embarrassed about the quality of the films because they were kind of their first films. So they're not that nuanced in the politics and the language that they use, and the aesthetics are kind of boring. Tolerance. That's something that I have a hard time dealing with because it's a question of what do you tolerate and what does tolerate mean? The best way that I've heard someone put it is like you kind of tolerate a headache. It's there and you kind of can't get rid of it unless you take their Tylenol or something. But it's not something that you particularly learn to like or accept. But then there's the question of like acceptance. What does acceptance mean, especially within queer critique? Are you accepted into ideas of like heteronormative society where you're basically forming homonormative relationships? You're becoming a part of the nation, but does that even critique the idea of what nationalism is and citizenship is? So I don't know. I don't really know where I stand with that. I guess to look at my perspective being a Canadian, acceptance is a good thing and it goes a long way, but it also creates a national mythology around Canada as being this open and accepting place. We are to a certain extent, but in terms of our relationship with Indigenous people and people of color and our histories of slavery and colonialism, we're dealing with it at the moment, but I don't know if this is going to be productive. And then we also look at our own pride marches. We have police in uniforms and military officers who march in them, and that is very, very controversial within communities such as people of color. So Black Lives Matter, they're very prominent, particularly in Toronto, where they don't want police in the parade whatsoever. And in Vancouver Pride, they're allowing the police to march, but it's a question of whether they wear their uniforms or not. And so these are the type of things that I'm thinking. And in terms of the films that I'm looking at, I haven't even gotten to that sort of question. It's just, this is what the narrative sort of talk about with tolerance. So I hope that answers your question.
While Roman is coming, I just wanted to comment on the second issue of what you didn't like about that. Since I was involved in the film that you mentioned briefly, this is Gay Propaganda by Marusa Betsurkiv. The way she constructed the narrative and the way she approached the film was to hear it. What's the English word for this? To make the LGBT activists that are in the film heroes, and that was her approach. The heroization was the approach of the film, and this is something that I felt very uncomfortable with the film because, well, of course, I know how it is from the inside. I know, well, definitely I'm quite self-critical and I'm critical of the actions that my colleagues are doing, and this is obviously a different perspective, but it was definitely not as shiny and definitely not as heroic as she wanted to present it, and I tried to give her this criticism, and I think she got quite offended.
Yeah, just to sort of respond to that, I had only recently seen the film in a screening in Montreal, and I asked a couple of questions in terms of like reception, like how did local activists think about it, how did local audiences think about it, and she just kind of brushed off the question. And it was one of those things where I was not super thrilled with that film. I thought that it was interesting in that it allowed me to know what's going on here in types of organizations, but other than that, I was like, I'm not really liking this narrative, and how she kind of made it a personal narrative in a way, but then she was also really focusing on certain people and making the narrative about them rather than this is my experience. I'm going to put this on at the end as being my experience. But also, like with any of these films, I have a hesitancy to be super critical of them, only because I want the filmmakers to talk to me, and if I start being really like critical of them, they're not going to want to talk to me, so that's a danger of this.
Thanks of for presentation. I have no question, but I would like to express several statements. I also understand that they could be accepted like something like provocative or something like this, but it is really very sensitive topics for me, so I cannot just miss it. First of all, I would like to just discuss an issue of Orientalism in Western filmmaking of LGBT plus or queer history and realities, both in Eastern Europe or in Asia and Africa, and I guess in maybe some other regions of the world. And I can also say about several maybe films. I do not know, have you had already seen them or not? For example, no, this is Gay Propaganda, it's a very good example for me, but what we said several minutes ago, or for example, Jump in the Future, it was, Jump in the Life, Прыжок в жизнь. Yeah, it was film made by КВІР, не помнишь? Да. But okay, and or for example, Interview in Holiday, it is very maybe one of the most famous I don't know LGBT plus short film, which also was made in, if I'm not mistaken, by a filmmaker from USA with LGBT plus couples from St. Petersburg, and for example, these films, I think they could be very good field to analyze how Western people reinterpret queer history and social realities for LGBT people in Eastern Europe. How they understand these issues in their own way, and how they apply their, I would like even to say, old-fashioned stereotypes origin from the Cold War times to the reality in nowadays. And for example, for me, the film as This is Gay Propaganda by Marusia Baturkiev, I don't know, do you know it or no? It really provoked a very huge discussion in Ukraine, even not to say scandal, for several reasons. Yeah, first one was that this filmmaker made a very limited access to her film, even for interviewers who gave it, and for me it was and the other two statements of even the other two features of Orientalism in this film I would like to underline. First of all, for example, I think, for my personal opinion, she did not solved a problem of invisibility of LGBT people among internally displaced persons. Notwithstanding, this maybe was one of the main aims of her film. And the second one, I, for example, was impressed by the very, very Western construction of queer criticism of militarism in this film. And when I, for example, heard the response of her respondents towards war, towards militarism, I did not present it in the process of this filmmaking, but I had an impression that Marusia said them something like, "Please say me what I want to hear from you," or something like this. No? Yeah. Okay. It's good, but yeah, Anya, I don't try to blame her, but we also should realize this process of filmmaking includes the process of subjective interpretation, of subjective composition. Yeah, and the last one maybe point is about. Yeah, and before this I had collaboration with two also filmmakers from Italy, which made films about LGBT plus in Ukraine. The first one names is 20 Stories After 20, and the second one, Queer Lives in Ukraine. And after this situation, and after situation with several ethical scandals, I just decided for me to interrupt collaboration totally with foreign filmmakers, because we also had to remember about the second issue related to this, about the ethical filmmaking, ethical basement of filmmaking. And it is pity that we have not Nadia Chushakia today in our auditory, because he works in Docu Days, and she can tell us a lot of story, how activists, how just ordinary people which were involved in process of Western filmmaking among representatives of vulnerable social groups suffered because of unethical behavior of Western filmmakers. Especially there were very huge several tragedies in this field in Russia and republics of Northern Caucasus, especially Chechnya. So I think it's also a big issue. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I have a couple of things I'd like to respond to that with. This idea of ethical questions is something that I'm continually going up against. So at my stage in my research, I'm actually going through ethics review board at my university in terms of what I'm doing, and my intention going forward in my research is to do interviews, but informed consent interviews, where whoever I speak to, I give them a transcript. They can edit it in any way that they want. If they want it included, they can. They can withdraw consent at any time. But in terms of these types of films, I don't know if they go through that process, or if it's someone who just sets off and decides to make a film. I would assume that Marussia would have gone through some sort of board, given that she's a professor at, I think it's York University, or Ryerson in Toronto. Okay, Ryerson. So I would assume that she would have gone through some sort of ethics review, but I have no idea. With documentaries, and even with like the stuff that I do looking at art exhibitions primarily, it's a bit difficult because we're sort of shoved into categories with people who are in law, people who are in history, people doing poli-sci, and so the reviewers come back with really strange questions, well, at least in my experience, they come back with strange questions where I'm like, I'm actually not looking at that. That's not something that I'm dealing with. But yeah, absolutely, there are huge ethical questions with what's going on in these films. I sometimes have a problem of just showing images from them, because I'm not sure how those are going to be received. I put images from them in this presentation, and then there was also an image from a photographer for LGL. I selected those because they were in the films, and these films have circulated, so I'm hoping I'm not doing any sort of damage by showing them, but that's also something that makes me very, very uncomfortable. And I wanted to go back to your point about Orientalism. For being a researcher in a Western university, Orientalism is normally talked about in relation to the global North and global South, and Eastern Europe is completely left out of it. There's an assumption within a lot of like critical race theory coming out of North American universities that Eastern Europe is considered to be white or Caucasian, and therefore is a force of orientalizing rather than being the subject of the Oriental gaze. And this is something where I have a big problem trying to find any sort of critical literature coming from my position that's in English that really challenges this. I have decentering Western sexualities, and I think that's an interesting way to sort of like go forward with this. But even still, that has very little circulation in Canadian universities. I see it much more in European conferences where they're brought up a lot. Robert Kulpa, he presents a lot on his research and stuff like that. But it is a question that I'm continuing coming back to is like, what about Eastern Europe? And I don't really have an answer, but yeah, it's an interesting point.
Just very briefly, again, on the films of Marussia, since I was helping her with the film, she showed me, she showed me the draft version of the film to comment, and I think she sent some of the draft version to some of her heroes and heroines, but I don't know the details more. And also, the screenings were closed. The access to the screening was limited because that was the idea of the organizers, not Marussia, the local organizers. She couldn't do it, and that was for security reasons, obviously. And the security, and there were some threats to the film. That's why it was so restricted. We have time for 2 more comments or questions.
Maybe one.
Доброго дня. Я б хотіла українською поставити свій коментар та питання. По-перше, дякую дуже за ці цікаві і змістовні презентації. Я звернула увагу на наступне. Як ми бачимо, організатори назвали цю секцію «Мультикультурність у вимірі гендерних ідентичностей». І це абсолютно виглядає відповідно до тих тем, які запропоновані в цих виступах. Бо культура, вона асоціюється з мистецтвом і з тими видами мистецтва, про які зараз йшлося, літературу, кінематограф і таке інше. Але з іншого боку, я звернула увагу на те, що мультикультурність в українському і суспільстві, здається, і академії, вона асоціюється, перш за все, з різноманіттям етнічним. І гендерна нерівність ніяк не підпадає
в цьому розумінні, в цьому просторі ніяк не підпадає під ці визначення, ці назви. Так. І мені цікаво, що колеги думають з цього приводу, в тому числі тому, що якщо ми будемо просувати тематику гендерної ідентичності, квір-досліджень, як, так би мовити, в руслі мультикультурності, або це можна називати іншими поняттями, наприклад, я використовую частіше полікультурність, бо це слово не так пов'язано з практикою мультикультуралізму, до якого ми знаємо ставлення дуже таке специфічне. Так? Якщо ми будемо просувати тематику гендеру і квір-студії в цьому просторі або в цій площині, це, на мою думку, буде сприяти його поширенню, перш за все, в українському суспільстві. І я б хотіла, якщо буде в когось цікавість, послухати, що ви думаєте про це. Дякую.
Це була я здам, це була ідея співорганізаторок з університету, тому я б хотіла надати слово, тому що я в організації конференції займалася більше адміністративними контентними справами.
Дуже коротка ремарка, just як підхок, як говориться. Насправді, якщо говорити про ось мультикультурність в тому вимірі, в якому ми сьогодні його побачили, тобто не як політика мультикультуралізму пов'язана з етикою, то навіть з класичної соціології культури це можна розглядати як різноманіття субкультур. І в цьому сенсі мультикультурність це, в принципі, може кореспондувати до цієї ідеї. Тобто мультикультуралізм як такий специфічний прояв бачення різноманітності субкультур, які кореспондують в єдиному суспільному просторі. І тут ми можемо говорити, знову ж таки, використовуючи класичну соціологію культури чи вже посткласичну соціологію культури, про ієрархії цих субкультур, про домінантну гегемонну культуру чи опресовані субкультури. І якраз в цьому контексті ця тематика теж може, і вже може мати певну методологію, яку напрацювала соціологія культури з цього боку. І мені здається, що цей ракурс дуже цікавий для подальшого дослідження. Дякую за цей коментар.
Чи є ще питання, коментарі чи зауваження? Виходь. Тоді це вже буде остання перед кавопаузою.
Thank you very much. I have one just small and maybe simple question because I'm a little bit out of this topic. Is there any homophobic films, special homophobic, because we have special LGBT films, or just homophobic topic is just widespread through all the films we have, like mass films?
No.
That's a great question, and I have absolutely no idea. I have chosen to focus on these films because they're really interesting to me, and it's the start of my research. I'm sure there are homophobic films, but I don't think that they're in English, and they're not directed towards us in the West. But I would be really interested to see them. I would probably have a really hard time and hate watching them, but I would still watch them. So I have absolutely no idea. I really don't know, but that's something that I would be very interested to find out.
I'm sure there are. We have a number of quasi-civil society organizations that aim to fight homosexuality, as they say, and they do have funding, and they do have films, and I think I have seen some, but it's any time to find them.
And for me, it's just the lens in which you watch the films. For me, such kind of film could be example of Oscar Wilde by Great Britain. I don't remember the main author of this film, but it shows homophobic surroundings, and it could be also reviewed as example of classical film which has these ideas homophobic. So I think that we even don't need to search specially for such kind of film, but we could find them rather easily.
Yeah, for us, there's actually a number of prominent examples coming from news organizations in the United States. For example, there's this notorious news report from, I think, the 1950s from 60 Minutes called The Homosexuals. And it's really over the top and talking about predators lurking everywhere. And it's one of those things that circulates online now as being like, this is a huge joke, look at how stupid this looks. But it's really interesting to see the type of narrative where it was talking about predatory behavior, but also weirdly asking for a little bit of tolerance. It's strange. And then there's a lot of films that talk directly towards children in terms of like predators, like look out for this person standing near the bathrooms, or that type of predatory behavior where it conflates like LGBT people and pedophiles. But that, I guess in Canada, that holds absolutely no weight anymore. I don't think it has for a number of years, maybe 10 or 20 years. At least not in my lifetime, but that definitely was there. Yeah, there's a number of examples from my country too, but in terms of like Eastern Europe, I have no idea. But that's interesting.
This is the very widespread rhetoric now, in the homophobic rhetoric in Ukraine, connection of gay people, well, gay men to pedophiles. So we are in that stage. I thank our panelists and the audience for the very interesting discussion. And we are breaking for coffee now.